Father confessed he mortgaged our family home to cover my brother's debts, and I had to choose between helping him repay everything or telling the rest of the family when the bank sent a notice that could force us out within weeks. Something sunk in my chest the instant I saw my father's name on the missed calls list, because he never called me late at night, and he never called more than once in a row. I remember sitting at my small kitchen table in my apartment in Portland, staring at my phone, feeling this slow burn of worry growing behind my ribs because I knew something was wrong, but I did not know how deep it ran yet, and maybe a part of me already understood that I was about to hear something that would change the way I saw my family forever. I am Kaylin, 36, and I work as a line supervisor at a shipping warehouse on the outskirts of the city, and most nights, I get home exhausted, heat up cheap dinners, flip TV channels without really watching anything, and talk to no one unless my friends convince me to get a drink after work. So when my father calls, it matters because he never wants anything from me except to hear I am doing fine. My father is Aren, 64, quiet, stubborn, raised on long hours and simple beliefs, the kind of man who once walked 2 miles home in a snowstorm after a 12-hour shift because his truck died. My mother, Lyra, 59, is warm and careful, always the one checking that the bills are paid, the doors are locked, and the world is not falling apart on any given week. I grew up in a small town called Harthill, a place with 2 barber shops, 1 overpriced diner, and neighbors who gossip about your life before you even live it. My older brother, Ren, would have been 35 this year, and I still trip when I say that because even though he died 8 years ago, I sometimes think about him like he is somewhere out there, making a mess and laughing about it, waiting for me to clean it up like I used to when we were teenagers. He died in a car accident. A single slide on wet pavement. A terrible corner. No alcohol. No speed. Just one of those things that takes a piece of your family and leaves a hole that no one knows how to fix because nothing feels right after that. My father kept working. My mother cried in private. I moved away because I couldn't stay in a house that echoed with a loss I couldn't name out loud. For years nothing big happened. Birthdays. Holidays. A few family arguments that ended with quiet apologies. Nothing more. So when I called my father back that night, I expected something small. A health scare. A broken appliance. Something simple. When he answered, I heard his breath shaking in this uneven way, and it hit me in the gut. "Kaylin, I need to tell you something," he said, and the way he said it made me stop breathing for a second because it sounded like guilt. Heavy guilt. Old guilt. The kind that builds over time. He went quiet again. I could picture him at the dining table at home, fingers pressed against his forehead, the torn cushion on his chair creaking under him. I told him to tell me. I tried to keep my voice steady. He told me the bank had sent a notice. Not a warning. A notice. A formal statement that the house I grew up in, the house my parents lived in for 39 years, the house that still had the smell of old furniture and the sound of my mother's knitting needles clicking away in the evening, could be taken within weeks. I actually felt my mouth go dry. I remember gripping the phone so tight my knuckles hurt. I asked him why. I asked him how. He hesitated for so long that I thought the line had dropped. Then he told me the truth. He had mortgaged the house years earlier to help cover Ren's debts. I felt like someone pushed cold air into my lungs. I hadn't even known Ren had debts, but my father said he had found out only months before the accident. Credit cards. Missed payments. Loans he shouldn't have taken. Things he had hidden from the family because he thought he'd fix it on his own. My father said the bank had been calling then and he panicked. He'd felt ashamed. He had believed if he covered everything, Ren would get back on track and no one would ever know. So he put the house up. Quietly. Secretly. My mother hadn't known. I hadn't known. When Ren died, my father wanted to tell us, but he said he couldn't bring himself to pile more grief onto the family, so he kept paying the mortgage each month and never mentioned it. He managed all right for a while. But last year he'd gotten laid off from his job at the steel plant when they cut a full shift. He hadn't told us. He picked up small jobs around town to keep up with payments, but the money had never been steady. And 3 months ago, he'd fallen behind. The bank was sending letters and calling him. He'd ignored them. He felt ashamed. He thought he could catch up if he found more work. But time ran out. I remember sitting there at my table, staring at the brown ring a coffee mug left on the wood, trying to understand how something this huge had happened without anyone knowing. My mother still didn't know. That hit me hardest. My father begged me not to tell her yet. He said she would break. He said he needed time. Then he asked me something that made my stomach twist. He asked if I could help him pay back the missed amount fast enough to stop the bank from taking the house. I had savings, but not much. Enough to help. Enough to buy time. But not enough to fix everything. It would cost more than I had ever held in my account at once. And if I did help, I would have to keep this secret from my mother. From the rest of the family. I could feel the weight of that choice pressing into me in a way that felt physical. I asked him how much time we had. He told me 2 weeks. 2 weeks before they would send someone to assess the property and begin the process. I told him I needed to think. I could hear how that hurt him, but I did not know what else to say. I hung up and sat there in the quiet, listening to the fridge hum and the faint sound of cars on the street below, and I felt something heavy settle in my chest because no matter what choice I made, someone in my family was going to get hurt. And I had no idea who I was about to become, the son who saved the house or the son who told the truth and watched everything crack open. I felt the weight of the next morning before I even opened my eyes because I had barely slept, and every time I drifted off, I kept seeing my father sitting alone at that table in Harthill with that look of quiet fear he always tried to hide from people, and by the time the sun showed through my blinds, I had this tight feeling in my throat that told me nothing about this situation would get easier if I waited longer. I went to work, walked through the warehouse doors, listened to the forklifts backing up and the buzzers beeping and the usual chatter bouncing off the metal walls, but was cut off from everything since I was only thinking about the house my parents lived in and the way it looked the last time I visited, the peeling paint my father refused help with, the old photos on the wall, the smell of engine oil wafting in from the garage because he never gave up that habit of fixing small machines in his free time, and the thought of strangers walking through that space to decide its worth made something twist inside me. By noon, I knew I could not sit there pretending to focus. So I stepped outside behind the loading dock and called my father again. When he answered, he sounded tired in a way I'd never heard before, like the years had suddenly stacked themselves on his shoulders, overnight. I told him I needed the full number, not an estimate, the exact amount he owed and the date the bank expected payment, and he walked me through it slowly, apologizing between sentences even though I told him to stop because hearing him apologize for trying to protect our family made my chest ache. The number was bigger than I had hoped but smaller than I had feared, still greater than my total savings by a large margin. I told him I would try to find a way to cover part of it, but I also told him I couldn't promise anything yet since I still had to think about what hiding this from my mother would mean, and he went quiet again, that same worried silence as the night before. After we hung up, I leaned against the cold metal wall and stared at the cracked pavement under my boots, this torn feeling building in me because helping meant taking on a weight that might crush me. And telling the truth meant watching my mother break, and either way I felt like the bad son. Later that day I drove home, sat on my couch without turning on the lights, trying to figure out where to even begin, but all I kept coming back to was Ren, because even though he was gone, his absence was now pushing us into a corner we never saw coming. I kept thinking about the last conversation we had, a short call a week before the accident where he told me he was proud of me for leaving town, for finding my own life, and it stung now, as I wondered if he knew how deep his debt ran, or if he hoped he'd fix it before anyone figured it out. I felt this sharp mix of anger and sadness roll through me because loving someone and being angry at them could sit side by side in ways no one warned you about. Around 9 that night my mom called me, her voice calm and warm, asking about my week, telling me she tried a new recipe for dinner and it turned out awful but my dad ate 2 servings anyway to make her feel better. And the sound of her laughter crushed me because she had no idea that her entire life might shift within days, and I did not know how to keep pretending I did not know something that could break her. I answered her questions carefully, trying to sound normal, but my voice felt heavy and she noticed because she asked me if I was sick or tired, and I told her I had a rough day at work, and she said I should rest and drink more water, and the way she cared so simply made the whole secret feel 10 times heavier. Afterwards, I sat there in the dark again and knew I needed to talk to someone, because if I let this sit in my mind without a second opinion I might make the wrong choice. I called my closest friend, Oren, someone I met years ago at my old job, a calm, honest guy who never sugarcoated anything, and when I told him what happened, he let out this long breath and said, "Man, that is heavy." And I remember nodding even though he could not see me. He asked the questions I had been avoiding, like how long my father had been hiding this, and what it would do to my mother to learn the truth, and what it would do to me to take on a debt this big, and hearing those questions out loud made everything feel more real. I told him I felt cornered, and he told me something that stuck, that both choices had a cost, but one of them might protect someone who could not protect herself, and that line sat in my chest long after we ended the call. I paced around my apartment for what felt like hours, trying to breathe through the anxiety, and I thought about the times my father covered for me when I messed up as a kid, the times he gave me quiet advice without pushing, the way he drove me to my first job interview when our old truck barely started, and I felt this pull toward helping him even if it hurt. But then I thought about my mother again, her soft hands, her small routines, the way she kept the house running while my father worked, and I imagined what would happen if she found out we kept this secret from her, and that fear hit me harder. I tried to picture the future in both scenarios. In one version, my father kept the house, my mother stayed safe, but I carried the secret across every holiday and every phone call. In the other version, I told the truth, everything exploded, and we tried to rebuild whatever was left. Neither felt right. Neither felt wrong. I sat down on the floor, leaning against the wall, feeling exhausted from my own thoughts. At some point, I realized I needed to see the notice myself, not just hear about it. So I texted my father and asked him to send a picture of the letter, and minutes later it came through a simple sheet with plain language that somehow felt colder than anything I had ever seen, because it talked about my childhood home like it was nothing but a financial object. That was the moment something in me shifted, not toward a decision yet, but toward this understanding that I could not outrun the responsibility anymore. I had to make a choice soon because time was closing around us. I drove to Harthill the next morning because sitting in my apartment with all those thoughts pressing into my head felt impossible, and the closer I got to town, the more unsure I felt about what I was going to say or do when I got there. But I needed to see my parents with my own eyes, and feel the air of that house again before I made any choice that could carve itself into our lives forever. The roads looked the same but smaller, the way childhood places shrink once you grow up, and when I turned onto our street, I saw the house with the faded shutters and the sagging porch rail, and I felt this deep ache move across my chest because everything about it was tied to memories that felt warm and painful at the same time. My father opened the door before I even knocked, like he had been waiting, and his face looked older than it did last month when I visited, lines deeper around his eyes, shoulders pulled down as if he had forgotten to stand tall. He pulled me into a hug that lasted too long and shook a little, and I felt this strange mix of anger and sympathy because I loved him and I was upset with him, and neither feeling knew where to sit. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and the faint scent of the lavender soap my mother used, and she came out of the kitchen smiling until she noticed the tension between us, and she touched my arm and asked if everything was alright, and I had to force the words out and tell her I came home because I missed them, because I could not tell her the truth yet, not while she was setting out clean plates and asking if I wanted eggs. We sat at the table, and I watched her fuss over small things while my father barely touched his food, and I kept looking at him, and he kept avoiding my eyes, and every second of that felt wrong. When she stepped out to hang laundry, he handed me a folder from a drawer under the counter and said everything the bank had sent was inside, and I opened it and felt this cold weight settle deeper because the arrears were worse than he described, not in the main number but in the way the interest was growing, slow and steady and sharp, and it made the timeline even tighter. I tried to keep my breathing steady because my mother was outside humming softly while pinning shirts to the line, and I wanted to walk out there and tell her everything because I hated lying to her more than anything, but I stayed seated because I wanted to understand everything before I shattered her peace. My father sat across from me and told me how he had tried to fix things year after year, how he had picked up side work, repaired lawn mowers, shoveled driveways, painted sheds, anything that kept him from falling behind, and I felt this pull between pity and frustration because he had built his whole life around working hard and not asking for help, and now we were drowning in the result of that same habit. I asked him why he did not tell me sooner, and he looked down, rubbing his thumb across the table, and said he did not want me carrying his mistakes, and hearing him call them mistakes made something in my throat tighten because he had acted out of love even if it came out twisted. After a while, my mom came back inside, and I forced myself to smile and help her fold a towel while she talked about the neighbor's new dog and her plan to fix the loose hinge on the pantry door. And the whole time I felt sick because I kept hearing the bank's timeline echo in my head. When she left again to water her plants, my dad leaned in and whispered that he understood if I walked away, that he would accept whatever choice I made. And that caught me off guard because I thought he was trying to pull me deeper, but he was actually trying to free me. I stepped outside into the yard because I needed air, and I watched my mom kneel beside her small patch of tomatoes while the wind moved through the tall grass. And for a moment, everything looked so peaceful that it almost made me angry because peace felt like a lie. I walked down the driveway and tried to imagine telling her the truth. I pictured her face falling. I pictured her hands shaking. I pictured her blaming herself or blaming my dad or both. I pictured their marriage cracking under the pressure and the house going silent in the worst way. That thought terrified me more than anything. When I came back inside, Dad was sitting in the living room with his elbows on his knees, staring at the carpet like it held answers. And I sat next to him and told him we needed to talk somewhere private before Mom heard something she was not ready for. We drove to the old park near the creek, a place we used to go when I was a kid and needed to cool off after arguments with Ren, and we sat on the worn bench under the big oak tree, and I told him I wasn't ready to choose yet, but I needed every detail, every payment, every letter, every phone call. He answered everything, slow and ashamed but honest, and by the time he finished, I felt this tightness in my chest that made it hard to breathe because I realized he'd been drowning alone for years and now I was his only lifeline. I told him the truth, that helping him would drain almost everything I had and still leave us short, that I might have to take a loan myself or change jobs or delay my own plans for years. And when I said that, he closed his eyes and whispered that he hated himself for putting me in this position. I told him I didn't hate him, but I was angry at the situation, and I didn't know how to protect both him and my mother at the same time. We sat in silence for a long time while the creek moved beside us, and I kept thinking that choosing between protecting one parent and hurting the other felt like choosing which part of my own chest to cut open. I stood up finally cause I couldn't sit anymore, and told him I need to go back to Portland to gather everything I had, look at every number, talk to my bank, talk to my job, talk to anyone who might guide me without judgment. And he nodded like he trusted me even though I didn't trust myself. When we got home, my mom was in the kitchen cooking dinner, and she asked if we wanted to stay and I told her I needed to get back before it got too dark, and she hugged me tightly and told me I looked tired and that I should not work myself into the ground, and hearing her say that nearly broke me open. I left the house feeling more torn than when I arrived cause now I understood the full weight of what my father had been carrying, and I also understood the full cost of what telling my mother would do. I sat in my car with the engine off for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe through the pressure building in my chest because a choice was coming and it felt like there was no right answer. I drove back to Portland with this heavy silence sitting in the car, the kind that makes you grip the wheel too tight, and somewhere on that long stretch of highway I realized I kept replaying the look on my father's face when he said he would accept whatever choice I made because it was the first time I saw him look small, and it scared me more than anything. When I got home I did not turn on the lights, just sat on the edge of my bed and started opening every folder on my laptop that held anything related to my finances because I wanted real numbers in front of me, not guesses, not feelings. And the longer I stared at those spreadsheets the more the reality settled that helping them meant changing my life in ways I was not ready for, but telling the truth meant changing their lives in ways they did not deserve. I tried calling Oren again but he was at work, so I was left alone with the sound of my own breathing while I ran through every possible outcome. First, I checked my savings, then my emergency fund, then the small investment account I kept for long-term goals, and when I added everything together, it still came up short by a painful margin. I sat back and felt my heart pounding because I knew what that meant. I would have to take on a loan, maybe even more than one, and the idea of chaining myself to debt for the next decade made my stomach twist. I walked around the apartment in circles, picking things up, putting them down, trying to slow my thoughts, but they kept racing. I thought about my father sitting alone at that park bench. I thought about my mom humming while watering her plants. I thought about the house, the peeling paint, the framed pictures that had not moved in 20 years, the way the floors creaked near the hallway. I thought about everything that made that place a home and not just a building, and it made choosing even harder. Around midnight, I finally forced myself to call my bank and leave a message asking for an urgent appointment for a personal loan. I felt ashamed while I left the message even though no one could see me. I felt like I was about to sign away years of my life to clean up a mess that was never mine, but it also felt like the only way to keep my parents from falling apart. I lay down but sleep did not come, so I stared at the ceiling and kept asking myself why I was the one who had to fix everything. I kept wondering what Ren was thinking when he took those loans, what he felt when it all spiraled, whether he thought he would survive long enough to fix it, and that thought hit me hard because part of me was angry at him, part of me missed him, and part of me wished he had trusted us enough to tell us before it got so bad. By morning I felt drained but also clearer because the truth was simple. I could not let the house disappear without a fight. I could live with losing money. I could not live with losing them. When the bank called back, the woman on the line listened to everything I explained and scheduled a meeting for the afternoon. I spent the hours before that pacing my apartment and running through different numbers again and again because I wanted to walk into that office prepared. When later that day I sat opposite her, I told her the situation without giving the deepest details, and she asked me the usual questions about my income, my expenses, my job stability, while she typed into her system and I waited with my hands folded too tightly in my lap. As she told me that I qualified for a loan for most of what I needed, relief and fear rushed into my chest at the same moment. I agreed to the terms though they scared me, because I knew what was waiting back in Heart Hill if I did nothing. The meeting over, I walked outside and sat on a bench in the cold air, trying to steady myself because I knew what I had to do next. I called my father and told him that in 2 days, I would be coming back with money to keep the bank away from the house. He didn't say a word at first. I could hear him breathe, maybe cry, maybe try not to cry, and then he said he didn't deserve this, that he wished he could fix it himself. I told him it wasn't about deserving anything. It was about making sure my mother stayed safe. It was about keeping the family together and the only way left. After we hung up, I sat there for a long period of time, thinking about whether helping him meant that I also had to tell my mother the truth, then realized that the answer was complicated. She deserved the truth, but she also deserved peace, and sometimes those two things could not exist in the same room. I decided to tell her eventually, not now, not while everything was burning, but when the danger passed, and she could hear it without feeling like her world was collapsing. I returned to Heart Hill 2 days later carrying a folder full of documents, and a knot in my stomach so tight it felt like I could not breathe. My father met me at the door and hugged me with both arms like he did when I was a kid who scraped his knees, and I felt something settle in my chest. My mother came out of the kitchen smiling and asking if I wanted something to eat, and I said yes because I wanted her to feel normal while the storm passed above her without touching her. Later that night, my father and I drove to the bank together in silence. We handed over everything. We signed every paper. We secured the house. When it was done, he sat in the car staring ahead with tears in his eyes and said thank you in a quiet voice that sounded broken. I told him I was tired and scared and unsure of the future, but I did not regret helping him. That night when we returned home, my mother kissed my cheek and said she was happy to see me relaxed again. I nodded and smiled and let her believe it. I sat on the porch later by myself, listening to the wind move across the yard and thinking about how strange it felt to save something that was never supposed to be in danger, and I realized this choice would shape the rest of my life in quiet ways I would feel for years. I felt proud. I felt angry. I felt relieved. I felt trapped. I felt all of it at once. And as I sat there under the porch light with the dark fields stretching out around me, I knew that protecting my family had come with a cost I would carry. But I also knew I would carry it without regret because some things are worth the wait.